I worked overnight highway maintenance for just over 4 years, and one of my regular responsibilities was responding to damaged barrier gates at toll plazas. If you've ever driven through a toll lane and accidentally clipped one of those white and red arms, chances are someone like me got called out in the middle of the night to replace it. Most barrier strikes were straightforward. A sleepy driver would misjudge the lane, a truck would take a corner too tightly, or someone trying to avoid paying would simply drive through the gate. We'd replace the arm, reset the controller, test the motor, and have the lane reopened before the morning rush. After a while, every call started feeling exactly the same. That's why the one from lane 12 still bothers me. It was a Tuesday morning in late October. Rain had been falling on and off since midnight, and traffic was almost non-existent. I was sitting in my maintenance truck finishing paperwork when my pager vibrated. Barrier strike, lane 12. The timestamp read 3:07 a.m. I acknowledged the call, started the truck, and headed toward the toll plaza. It sat on a quiet stretch of interstate, surrounded by dense woods, about 20 miles outside the city. Overnight shifts there were usually uneventful. You could stand in the middle of the roadway for half a minute without seeing another vehicle. As I pulled into the maintenance entrance, something immediately looked wrong. Normally, after a barrier strike, I'd see a damaged vehicle parked nearby, flashing police lights, or at least bits of broken plastic scattered across the lane. There was nothing. The lane had already been closed automatically by the system, but it was completely empty. Then I saw the barrier. Half of it lay across the pavement. The other half was still bolted to the motor housing. The aluminum mounting bracket had been bent backwards so violently that it almost touched the concrete pedestal. Fresh scrape marks scarred the concrete base beneath it. I crouched beside the damage and ran my hand across the fractured metal. It wasn't cracked. It had been crushed. I'd replaced hundreds of barrier arms over the years. Even when a tractor trailer hit one, the damage usually bent in the direction of travel. This one looked like something had compressed it from both directions at once. The plaza supervisor walked over carrying a flashlight. He didn't ask whether I could repair it. Instead, he said, "Don't touch anything until you've seen the recording." That wasn't normal. Every toll lane automatically saved a short video clip whenever its impact sensors detected a collision. The footage was mainly used for insurance claims and police reports. We walked into the operations room. The supervisor loaded the incident clip. The camera overlooked the entire lane from above. The timestamp rolled forward, 3:07:13. The lane sat empty beneath the floodlights. Rain drifted through the beam of light. Nothing moved. Then, without warning, the barrier jerked downward so violently that I actually flinched. It bent almost in half, snapped apart. Half of it flew into the roadway. The remaining section twisted backward against the motor housing. The entire sequence lasted less than 2 seconds. No vehicle ever entered the frame. No headlights. No shadow. Nothing. The supervisor replayed it, again and again. By the fourth viewing, we were advancing frame by frame. Every image showed an empty lane, yet the barrier reacted exactly as if a fully loaded truck had driven straight through it. The supervisor finally picked up the phone. "I need engineering." Within 40 minutes, 2 transportation engineers arrived from the regional operations center. Unlike me, they weren't interested in the barrier itself. They wanted the electronic logs. Every modern barrier motor continuously records its operating conditions: motor torque, barrier position, travel speed, impact direction, electrical load. If a vehicle hits the arm, the controller usually knows whether the force came from the front or the rear. One engineer connected a diagnostic laptop to the controller, while the other downloaded the log. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. Finally, one of them frowned. "That's impossible." The supervisor leaned over. "What?" The engineer turned the laptop toward us. The controller registered resistance from the front. He paused. "And from the rear." I looked at him. "At the same time?" He nodded. "The motor thinks something pushed against both sides simultaneously." Nobody said anything. There was nothing behind the barrier except empty roadway. The broken arm was removed and sent to the State Materials Laboratory. A week later, I was called into the regional maintenance office. A metallurgist had finished examining the aluminum. He explained the fracture using photographs enlarged across a conference table. Normally, when a vehicle hits a barrier, microscopic stress lines run in one direction. The damaged arm from lane 12 showed something entirely different. The compression patterns originated from both ends. He actually used the phrase, "This resembles two heavy objects moving toward each other." One of the engineers laughed awkwardly. "Except that's impossible." The metallurgist simply shrugged. "I'm only telling you what the metal says." Life returned to normal after that. The barrier was replaced. The paperwork was filed. Most of us assumed we'd never hear about it again. Then, 11 months later, my pager went off during another overnight shift. Barrier strike, lane 4. Different toll plaza, different county, different equipment. The time was 3:18 a.m. When I arrived, I stopped walking before I even reached the lane. The barrier looked identical, same crushed mounting bracket, same twisted motor housing, same clean break across the aluminum arm. Again, no vehicle, no debris, no witnesses. The surveillance footage showed the same thing. An empty lane, a sudden violent impact, then silence. This time I noticed something nobody had mentioned before. After the barrier snapped, it didn't fall in the direction the force should have carried it. It landed backward, as though it had been thrown from the opposite side. Over the following 18 months, 2 more barriers failed in exactly the same way, always between 3 and 3:30 a.m., always during overnight operations, always with completely empty lanes. Eventually, the transportation authorities stopped treating the incidents as isolated equipment failures. A quiet policy update was circulated to every overnight maintenance crew in the state. It wasn't announced during meetings. There were no explanations, just a single addition to the inspection checklist. Before replacing any unexplained barrier strike, photograph both sides of the gate and document the final resting position of the damaged arm. That wording caught my attention. Not collision, not vehicle impact, unexplained barrier strike. Years later, after electronic tolling replaced most of the old plazas, I helped dismantle one of the facilities where the second incident had happened. Inside the maintenance building was a locked filing cabinet waiting to be discarded. Before throwing it away, we checked for paperwork. Most of the folders contained routine inspection reports. Near the bottom sat a thin binder with no label. Inside were photographs. Every unexplained barrier strike from every toll plaza. Each page showed another shattered barrier, lying across empty pavement. At first they all looked the same. Then I noticed something. Every broken arm had come to rest facing the opposite direction from the impact recorded by the controller. The final page wasn't a report. It wasn't signed. It wasn't even dated. It was a handwritten note clipped to the inside cover. It read, "Replace the barrier immediately. Do not reinstall the damaged arm under any circumstances." There was no explanation beneath it, no engineer's name, just those 12 words. I asked my supervisor if he knew who had written it. He stared at the page for a long time before quietly closing the binder. Then he slid it back into the cabinet. "I've never seen that before," he said. The cabinet was loaded onto a truck later that afternoon. I never saw the binder again. But every time I drive through a toll plaza late at night and watch one of those barrier arms rise for an approaching car, I still catch myself wondering what kind of force can leave marks on solid aluminum without leaving a single mark on the road. I started working at a toll plaza during my last year of college. It wasn't exciting work, but the overnight shift paid better than anything else I could find. From 10 p.m. until sunrise, I'd sit alone inside a small booth collecting cash from the occasional driver heading down the state turnpike. Most nights were painfully quiet, maybe 20 or 30 cars an hour if I was lucky. The only thing that ever interrupted the silence was the radio connected to the operations building across the plaza. Every booth also had one feature I hoped I'd never need, a silent panic button hidden beneath the counter. If someone tried to rob you or became violent, you pressed it. It didn't make a sound or flash any lights. Instead, it sent an emergency signal directly to state police dispatch. The idea was simple: keep the employee calm, while officers responded, without alerting whoever was causing the problem. During training, they made one thing very clear. The alarm can't activate by accident. The button was protected by a heavy metal cover. You had to lift the cover and deliberately press it. About 3 months into the job, I learned why everyone took it so seriously. It was around 2:26 a.m. when my radio suddenly crackled. "Booth 4, status check." I picked it up. "This is Booth 4. There was a pause. "Are you okay?" I looked around. The lane was empty. "I'm fine." "Did you activate your panic alarm?" "No." Another pause. "Stand by." 2 minutes later, the plaza supervisor walked into my booth. He looked more confused than concerned. "Show me your hands." I laughed. "What? Just humor me." I placed both hands on the counter while he reached underneath and checked the panic button. The protective cover was still closed. He opened it. The button hadn't been touched. He reset the alarm panel and told me to finish my shift. Everyone assumed it was an electrical fault. The following night, I almost forgot about it. Business was slow. A light rain had settled over the highway, and I was halfway through a cup of coffee when the radio came alive again. "Booth 4, respond." "This is Booth 4. Did you press the panic button?" "No." The supervisor arrived less than a minute later. Again, nothing was wrong. This time, however, he didn't leave immediately. Instead, he asked the operations room to pull up the CCTV footage. We watched it together. For several minutes, nothing unusual happened. Cars came through normally. Drivers paid and left. Then something caught my attention. Just before dispatch received the alarm, I turned my head toward the rear emergency exit of the booth. Not quickly, slowly, like I had heard something. I stared at the door for nearly 10 seconds. Then I turned back around and continued working. "I don't remember doing that," I said. The supervisor rewound the footage. The door never opened. Nobody appeared outside. There wasn't even another vehicle nearby. "What were you looking at?" he asked. "I honestly don't know." By now, the state police wanted answers too. A false panic alarm wasn't something they ignored. The next evening, they decided not to wait for another dispatch. 2 troopers parked their cruiser behind an abandoned maintenance building less than 100 yards away. "If it goes off again," one of them told me, "we'll be here before anyone else." At 2:24 a.m., it happened for the 3rd time. The radio hadn't even finished announcing the emergency before I saw flashing lights racing across the plaza. The officers reached my booth in less than 30 seconds. One stayed with me while the other walked around the outside of the building. A few moments later, I heard him yell, "Over here!" We stepped outside. The rear emergency exit was open, not wide, just enough to leave a narrow gap. I knew I'd locked it before starting work. Company policy required us to check it at the beginning of every shift. The officer examined the muddy ground behind the booth with his flashlight. Fresh footprints disappeared into the trees beyond the service road. Only one set. They led away from the booth. None came back. A search continued for nearly an hour with additional officers and a K9 unit. Nobody was found. The following week, technicians inspected the entire emergency system. They replaced switches, tested wiring, checked every relay and connection inside the control cabinet. Nothing failed. According to every diagnostic test, the alarm could only activate if someone physically pressed the button. That should have settled it, except the security footage raised one final problem. The camera aimed directly at my workstation clearly showed both of my hands resting on top of the counter at the exact moment every panic alarm was received. Neither hand disappeared below the desk. Neither hand moved toward the protective cover. The button was never touched. The booth stayed open for another 6 months before the entire toll plaza was renovated for electronic tolling. I transferred to a different location and never worked another overnight shift there. A few years later, I ran into the same supervisor at a highway rest stop. We talked for a while before I finally asked if they had ever figured out what caused those alarms. He smiled for a second, then shook his head. "They replaced every wire in that booth," he said. "Everything. So it never happened again." He looked back toward the highway before answering. "The panic alarm never activated again." Blake, he paused. but they never found out why someone unlocked the rear door that third night. That was the last thing he said before getting back into his truck. For some reason, that unanswered question has always bothered me more than the alarms themselves. I worked the overnight shift at a small interstate toll plaza for a little over a year. It wasn't a difficult job. After midnight, traffic slowed to almost nothing, and most of the shift was spent waiting for the occasional truck or late-night traveler. The only part of the job that required strict procedure was the shift change. Every morning at 3 a.m., another toll collector relieved whoever had been working overnight. Company policy was simple. The incoming collector had to physically enter the booth, count the cash drawer, sign the paper logbook, and only then could the overnight employee leave. Management took that logbook seriously. If a signature was missing, both employees could be written up. One rainy Thursday morning, I was finishing my paperwork when I looked up at the security monitor mounted above the window. My relief was walking across the plaza. It was Mark. We'd worked together for months. Same reflective jacket, same blue lunch bag he carried every shift, same dark baseball cap. I unlocked the side door before he even reached it. "Morning," I said as he stepped inside. He nodded, set his lunch bag on the floor, and picked up the logbook. While he signed his name, I counted the cash drawer one final time and explained that Lane 2's receipt printer had been acting up all night. He barely spoke, just gave a quick nod every now and then. I figured he was tired. Once everything was signed over, I handed him the cash drawer, grabbed my backpack, wished him a good shift, and drove home. About 20 minutes later, my phone rang. The caller ID showed the plaza supervisor. "Where are you?" "Home." "You already left?" "Yeah." Mark relieved me. There was silence. Then he said something that made absolutely no sense. "Mark never came to work." I laughed. "Very funny. I'm serious." I just handed him the booth. "You need to come back." The moment I pulled into the plaza, I knew something was wrong. 2 state police cruisers were parked outside booth 3. The supervisor met me before I even got out of my car. "Tell me exactly what happened." I repeated everything. Mark arrived, signed the logbook, took the cash drawer. I left. The supervisor shook his head. When we called Mark, he was still at home. Inside the booth, the cash drawer sat exactly where I'd left it. The paper logbook was still open on the counter. There, written neatly beneath my signature, was Mark's name. It looked identical to every signature he'd ever written. Police secured the booth and began reviewing the security cameras. The first video came from inside. At 2:58 a.m., I was clearly seen standing near the counter talking to someone. I smiled once, pointed toward the receipt printer, reached forward as though handing over the cash drawer, then picked up my backpack and walked out. The problem was, the second person never appeared. The camera covered the entire booth. There wasn't a single blind spot. It looked as though I was having a conversation with empty space. Everyone assumed the exterior camera would solve it. It didn't. That recording showed me unlocking the side door from inside. A few seconds later, I walked out alone. Nobody entered before me. Nobody followed after me. The door simply opened and closed. The police shifted their attention to Mark. His time card showed he never clocked in. His cell phone records placed him at home nearly 40 miles away. A gas station receipt from 2:47 a.m. confirmed he had stopped for fuel in the opposite direction of the toll plaza. Then investigators examined the logbook. A forensic handwriting examiner compared the signature to years of employment records. His conclusion surprised everyone. The signature had almost certainly been written by Mark himself. Not copied, not traced, written naturally. There was no evidence of forgery. The company eventually replaced the handwritten logbook with an electronic badge system. Officially, the incident was recorded as an unexplained security discrepancy. No one was disciplined. No one was blamed. I finished out the month before transferring to a daytime position. A few weeks later, Mark and I finally sat down together over coffee. Neither of us brought up that night at first. Eventually, I asked him one question. "If you weren't there, why does your signature look so real?" He stared at his cup for a long moment. "I don't know," he said quietly. Then he looked at me. "But there's something I've never understood either." "What?" He frowned. I remember waking up that morning feeling exhausted, like I'd already worked an entire shift. Neither of us spoke after that. We finished our coffee, paid the bill, and went our separate ways. Years have passed since then. The toll plaza has been demolished and replaced with overhead electronic tolling. The booth where I worked doesn't exist anymore. But every so often, I still think about those 5 minutes that never made sense. Not because the cameras failed, not because of the signature, but because I can still remember standing in that booth, carrying on a completely ordinary conversation with someone I recognized instantly. I remember his face. I remember his clothes. I even remember handing him the cash drawer. Yet no matter how hard I try, I can't remember a single word he said.